Welcome to Magnify Your Message. Inspiration magnified.
Organic agriculture is more of a process base. A regenerative agriculture is more of an outcomes base. So I'm not throwing organic under the bus, so to speak. It's a good way to grow food, but I would argue regenerative is better.
Hello and welcome back to the show. Today on the Magnify Your Message podcast, we are joined by a true pioneer in regenerative agriculture, Farmer Steve Groff. Farmer Steve is a third-generation farmer who transformed his Pennsylvania farmland into a thriving ecosystem that is now visited by farmers from over 30 countries. 40 years ago, Steve made a bold decision to stop tilling his fields, marking the beginning of a revolutionary approach that would challenge everything conventional farming stood for. What makes Steve's story truly remarkable is how his Cedar Meadow farm has become a living laboratory for growing some of the most nutrient-dense foods on the planet. His mimic nature philosophy not only restored life to his soil, but it has also led to groundbreaking developments in CBD cultivation that are now catching the attention of some of the world's best medical researchers. Today, he'll show how his 4 decades of experience could hold the key to transforming global food systems and human health. Do not miss this episode. You're in for a treat. It is my delight and honor to introduce you to today's guest, Farmer Steve. Farmer Steve, you are making such a measurable difference in life. Thank you for being here.
Well, you're welcome, Cheryl. And I also appreciate, what you do as well. And, together, I like to look at humanity as it's a team effort, regardless of what we're talking about. So it's an honor to be on your podcast today.
Thank you. A team effort, humanity as a team effort. That is fantastic. Share with people who you are. What do you do? What do you provide?
So I'm Farmer Steve, a third generation farmer from southeastern Pennsylvania. And for the last 40 years or so, I have been growing food in a way that is designed to be healthy. And I know that sounds, simplistic, but I'm talking about nutrient dense food, food that will help to mitigate chronic illnesses. 70% of Americans today die from a chronic disease or illness. And, I'm not against pharmaceuticals, but I think the pendulum has swung too far that way. And so I'm trying to not only just promote it, but actually do it, to grow food that is more nutritionally enhanced so that when people eat it, they're going to be healthier. And I know that's a big goal, but that's what I'm trying to do. Here in the past couple years, I've kind of shifted a little bit of my focus to growing industrial hemp. And I know that opens up a whole new topic, but that's really what I'm doing now. And I'm using the same principles that I've been using for growing food to grow hemp in an environmentally friendly way. And I like to say that hemp is the best plant that God made for humanity. When you think about its medicinal purposes, when you think about making clothing with it, when you think about making all kinds of things, and now replacing carbon-based fuels and carbon-based plastic and all that stuff, we're now talking about a plant that not only helps people but helps the planet. And that's exciting to be a part of that. But the challenges of that are monumental. And we still have stigma to overcome. A lot of people associate it with marijuana. I like to tell people that the difference is most people are familiar with corn. You have sweet corn, you have popcorn, you have field corn for the cattle. They're distinctively different, but yet they're all corn. And hemp is the same way. You have the type of plant that's been selected to grow CBD, which a lot of us have grown, and I actually have a brand of that. And also you have hemp to be grown. People are familiar with rope. and clothing, and also other uses in building materials and so forth. And then you have marijuana. So throughout history, the plant has been selected to do each of those different traits. So I'm more in the industrial hemp space, growing it for uses again for humanity, and it's a great opportunity, but still we're fighting a lot of stigma yet, and a lot of just misunderstanding with the plant and government regulations and so forth. That I literally have to have an FBI background check. I have to have a criminal check to even grow the stuff. I have to have a permit to do it. And it kind of feels a little bit disingenuous when I'm just trying to grow a plant, to make clothing. But I think we'll get through that because I see the opportunity out there.
You say industrial hemp. Is clothing the number one thing that's made with it, or is it rope? And then you talked about replacing plastic. This is fascinating. Would you tell us some more about industrial hemp and educate us?
I have to go global because there's only less than 20% of textiles are actually manufactured in the United States. There, Asia and Europe is where the balance is, actually primarily Asia. So in that dynamic, they have been growing this crop for literally China thousands of years. It was never banned. It was banned here in the United States for 80 years, so we're trying to play catch up. So there's very little natural textile factories here in the United States. That is starting to change now with the overall interest in people wanting to use more natural anything, if you will. And clothing comes into that. Now, of course, we have cotton, that's natural. But cotton has some limitations, or maybe I should say hemp has some benefits over cotton. One thing is we can grow it in the north. You can only grow cotton in the southern part of the United States. So there's an advantage there of growing it in a broader geographical area. So those are some of the reasons that we're struggling now, because the industry is basically shut down, and now we're starting to reopen that. But you don't just turn a switch. You don't just open up a factory and start producing a new crop in a whole new supply chain, if you will. So that's the challenges in front of us, but I see the opportunity, and that's what my goals are.
There seems to be so much more conversation these days about forever chemicals in clothing.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
And as you're talking about the natural alternatives, it's I would imagine at some point the consumer will start to drive this, but have you seen that happen yet? Or is there still too much stigma from the correlation people are incorrectly making between marijuana and then the regulations, like the FBI background check, the regulations imposed by the government?
Well, it's a work in progress, and it's headed in the right direction, much slower than I would like. So that's the good news. That's why I'm bullish about the plant, because it's going to change, and because I know that there is consumer demand because of these attributes that I just suggested. So it's more the challenge now is getting the supply chain up and going. Now you mentioned the forever chemicals and plastics and all that. I just become aware of that recently in the last couple of years, and I think most of us are like, wow, I didn't know that, but that kind of does make sense. I kind of believe it. And I like to go back a couple decades. I'm not going to blame my grandparents for liking things like polyester and nylons, because that was the new thing of the day. And you know how it is today. We go after the new shiny objects, the new inventions, the new technology. So I'm not blaming the past in the context of where we've gone. I do have I think a pretty substantial theory that the whole industry of the textiles, even the oil companies and so forth, felt threatened by this plant, but they used marijuana to ban it. Now that's another topic maybe for another day, but you just do a few Google searches and you'll probably find out that's true. So I'm going to say this, that fake news just wasn't invented in the last 5 or 10 years. There was a lot of media manipulation when you go back and studying that. So we're kind of overcoming that right now. And I got to say, we're not getting any favors from the FDA to promote the health benefits of this because it is a threat to big pharma. And some of the other industries out there, I'll just say big oil, they're not putting wind in our sails because we're actually replacing plastic, which comes from oil. A lot of people don't realize that. Um, and now we're starting to realize, Cheryl, that there is some residual toxic chemicals, objects, things, whatever you want to call it, in almost everything. It's in our clothing, it's in our houses, it's in our food. And and again, I'm not trying to strike fear in anybody. I don't want to do that. But it's like, okay, maybe that's why we have some of these issues we have in health.
Mm.
And it's not just one thing, I can tell you that. It's many little things. So circling back to hemp, and this is what I love about hemp because it can replace a lot of the things that we're starting to realize now are causing us. I call it background harm. It's that chronic in the background. It's not overt. You can't put your finger on it, but you know something's there. Hemp can actually help in reversing that. It's not going to be overnight, but this is some of the reasons why, as people begin to understand, where we've come from and what the potential is of where we can go and be healthier. I mean, you talk about living in a home that has insulation with hemp in the walls. It's a better insulation than synthetic insulation that's out there. It controls humidity better. It doesn't get moldy. And there's a lot of attributes about this crop that I frankly didn't even know until recently when I started growing it and getting into it. So yes, we're trying to address some of these, I'll say, ailments that are out there, trying to get to the root causes. We're starting to see this now more and more, and we do have some solutions out there, and that's why I'm really excited to be a part of this.
It sounds like such a fascinating plant. I mean, the ability to withstand mold alone, it's it's fascinating and what it can do. So you talk about being a multi-generational, having this multi-generational farm. Did you know as a boy that not just that you were destined to go into into farming, but was that your childhood dream?
Oh, absolutely. There is, I can, maybe this is a little overstatement. There's never a day where I didn't want to be a farmer. And actually, when I was in sixth grade, I told my mom, I can't believe I said this. I said, I don't even want to go to high school
Uh,
because I'm going to be a farmer, and that's what I wanted to be. And my mom said, I'm going to write that down. And she did. And that's an interesting read right now. I will say this, I'm very glad I went to high school. But then people ask me, well, where did you go to college? And I'm like, well, I'm still in college. And like, well, where'd you go? I said, well, actually, I didn't go. So I did, graduate from high school and right into the farm. I, but I'm curious. I'm always learning. So in reality, I still am in college and still I'm learning, and I'm kind of self-taught, if you will, and read a lot of books. And I found the value of networking with a lot of other people who are smarter than me. And so yeah, it started, from, I guess you could say, day one. And I'll just say one example, Cheryl. When I was in 12th grade, senior in high school, I took the least possible courses I possibly could take. And I did discipline myself to maximize everything in study hall. My goal for my senior year was to take no homework home. And I accomplished that. Now I can't say there wasn't a few days where I wasn't doing a few little things, but I accomplished that. And I just didn't understand why some other, I'm going to say, more intellectual people in my class said, I pulled an all-nighter because I wanted to get an A in a test. And so I'm not saying either is good or bad, but that's me. And
right.
I have no regrets. So because I'm still learning today.
There's something, a juxtaposition that I want to make here. You
Mhm.
talk about not having gone to college, and yet the paradox is some of the most renowned educational institutions, some of the most renowned universities in the country, ergo the world, are educational institutions that you're working with now.
Yes.
Would you say something about that?
Yeah, and I will say too, before people might think I have a opinion about higher learning. No, I don't. I sent our two daughters to college, by the way, and they graduated with degrees. So I'm all for it. I mean, I certainly want to make that clear. Yes, it is kind of ironic that I do teach. I do a lot of educating and a lot of speaking. I've spoken all over the U.S., Canada, and 12 different countries around the world. And it does kind of hit me sometimes when I'm in a university and the professors and people are sitting there listening to me talk. That kind of is, I kind of think it's a cool thing. But I'm working here locally with Penn State College of Medicine, and we're doing some research in with our CBD that we grow. We grow the CBD plants, we extract it, and then bottle it up and sell it. So for the last 4 years, I have been growing the CBD varieties so that they can study the effects of what CBD can do in human health. And that's kind of one level. The second level is we compare the plants grown on my soil, my methods of regenerative agriculture versus a more conventional way. And we have seen differences. And as in any science, it's never like black and white, there's nuances to it. But we know, we got 4 years of research now, that growing in a regenerative way is a benefit toward the efficacy. And they've actually taken this right now. They're to the laboratory animal studies, and they're not yet to the people studies. But even in mice, they have seen differences of the CBD grown in my farm versus the effects of a CBD grown on a more conventional setting. So that is really kind of cool. That's really gratifying. And they're doing research with cancers, different types of cancers, like some melanoma forms, some colon cancers. They actually have killed colon cancer cells in a petri dish with CBD grown on my farm. How cool is that? Now, until
So amazing.
we're not ready yet to prescribe it. That takes 10 years from start to finish till we get to that, but we're on that track. And for me as a farmer, that's extremely gratifying to be able to be a part of something like that.
It is so inspiring. And, I wanted to speak about it because if there's one hallmark of you that I've come to recognize, it's your humility.
Oh,
And
yeah.
that's such a big deal. Penn State College of Medicine, it is just it's really extraordinary, and the impact that you're making there. It's heartwarming to hear how the conversation you had with your mom when you were 6. I mean, I
Oh,
don't
sixth
I
grade, by the way, sixth grade.
oh, 6th grade, excuse
I
me, that
clarify
you
that.
were crystal clear at that age that this was for you. You know, you're so far ahead of the curve on so many things. There's People are starting to talk about regenerative ag now,
Yeah.
but the first person I ever heard even mention it was you years ago. And it's now being regarded as the most important thing we can do to save the planet.
Mhm.
What it what do you I mean, I'm wondering, is there are there things that you might recommend for people that are listening that they can do? Is it asking at their local markets or going to farmers markets and asking who does regenerative ag and buying those products? Is it encouraging local farmers to do that? Is it, I don't know, planting something ourselves? What do you recommend that people do so
Oh,
that
everything
they
you,
can
yeah,
help?
everything you mentioned is definitely an answer to that question. And I never set out to be involved in something that turned into a, we can say, global movement. And it's not just me. I was one of the many spark plugs, if you want to say it that way. I use that analogy that we came together. But going back to the mid 1990s is when I started seeing that. And I'm gonna bring up some more questions here, but I just thought there was a better way than organic. and everyone is familiar with organic agriculture. It's a good way to farm, but I would argue it's somewhat dated in the fairly strict rules that it has. And I'll just say up front that organic agriculture is more of a process base. You check off the boxes. This is what you didn't do, this is what you did do, and you check it off, and then you get your certification, and then you label it as organic. And or regenerative agriculture is more of an outcomes base. It's like, okay, does this tomato have higher calcium levels in it, or higher selenium, or immunity type uh, nutrients in it? And it's not so much how you got there, but it's more or less what was the result of it. And with modern technology, it's kind of interesting where we want to use modern technology, but we don't want to get stuck in tradition sometimes. But we also want to stay with the good things in tradition, and that's what's kind of hard, gray areas, you might say. So a quick definition of regenerative agriculture is it is an outcomes based movement where we're looking more at the end result. And I kind of use the analogy of a sports team. And again, I'm going to say this a couple times. I'm not throwing organic under the bus, so to speak. It's a good way to grow food, but I would argue regenerative is better. So organic would be like you have a sports team. Let's just use football because that's a popular analogy. They do their workouts. They review game films from the past for the upcoming opponent, and so forth. They get ready for the game. They check the boxes. They go and do all the necessary things to play the game and to potentially win. They check all the boxes. Okay, just because they check all the boxes doesn't mean they're going to win. Whereas regenerative is more like, okay, it's more like based on the score at the end. Did you win or did you not? And yes, you intuitively had to check those boxes off, but you're graded more on did you win or did you not win. And I don't know if that helps anybody. It helps me to understand a little bit better, because when you start digging deep into, well, what do you mean, Steve? Give me some examples. Well, I could give you hundreds of examples, but it's a little tough to explain it. And that's been a little bit of a challenge with the organic movement. When people hear about it, the tenets are definitely healthier food, and that's like the top. And they ask the questions about, what is it? Well, I'll just say a few things. Is we try to mimic nature as much as possible. We don't want to disturb the soil. We want to keep the soil covered. We want to keep something growing in the soil. And for anybody who knows more of, maybe a second or third level of agriculture, that means not tilling the soil, using no-till methods. That means using cover crops, protecting the soil. That means diversity of plant species. So it gets pretty complex. And a farmer just can't say, oh, next year I'm going to be regenerative. It's not that way. It's like going from a nurse to a surgeon. And so to do that, you don't just walk in the hospital and say, okay, I'm going to start operating on people today. You don't just say, okay, I'm just going to start regenerative agriculture today. And one other thing I'll add to maybe this definition here is context. What works in California may not work in Pennsylvania, or vice versa. And that's where the organic gets a little bit restrictive sometimes because of different climates, geography, weather patterns, all that. Regenerative agriculture gives some leeway to different geographical regions based on the outcomes of any given crop they're trying to grow.
So walk us through, you started going that way with the ground crops and never tilling the soil. What are the other things that happen in regenerative? Like, what are those steps to get from being a nurse to a surgeon?
Yeah.
It's
Well,
fascinating.
first of all, I tell farmers, when I talk to farmers, you got to get educated. You got to educate yourself on what are we talking about here? What does this mean? And the best thing is to get a mentor. Go to a farmer who's doing what you want to achieve. If we'll use our medical analogy here, a surgeon always is some sort of internship. They work with a team before they start getting the scalpel. They're there. They're a part of it. And in a sense, you got to do that with regenerative agriculture because there's so many nuances to it. And so we're looking at various things, and that's where that's where it starts to get a little complicated. That being said, we're at the point now, Cheryl, you said you've seen it around. Most people are starting to hear the word. And even farmers are, some farmers are like, well, I've always done it this way and I can't mess up my system. I understand that. But I also and I wrote a book called The Future Proof Farm. And in that book, the title, the subtitle is Changing Mindsets in a Changing World. So, every business has these mindsets that need a change. So I tell farmers who, maybe are resistant to consider, and I said, if you don't change, you may become obsolete because people may not want your produce or your whatever you grow, or the market will dictate that, because markets is really what drives a lot of people in their decisions and what they end up doing. So I know farmers now who a couple years ago would have never thought about regenerative. Now they're saying, "Oh, I think this is legitimate. I better get on board." So that's kind of the transition as it's evolving here, and that's why the first thing I encourage people to do, farmers, is to start learning about. And if you're a home gardener, or something like that, you have a small garden, there's lots and lots of resources online, and just like anything else online, you have to sift through what's applicable to you and your region and everything. But these principles can be applied anywhere. I think one of the most interesting visits I had was from someone from Manhattan, New York City, who did they did I guess they call them rooftop gardens and windowsill gardens. And they said, "Can we come? We want to learn what you're doing." I'm like, "Wow." I said, "I don't know if I have much to offer you." "No, we want to come." So it was an interesting conversation to try to apply some of the principles to skyscrapers in New York City from, a rural setting like me. But then I've had people here at my farm who grow 40,000 acres. I've been teaching for instance, in Bulgaria, on 20,000 acres, which is a lot, compared to my little 200 acres that I have here. So the breadth of this is it's not contained to a certain size, small or large, and that's what's really cool about it.
What are you most excited next that you're up to?
A lot of what I've been working up toward here is, the fundamentally what I just described, but I've really been focused now on hemp, and I know we started to talk about that, and that has it's really kind of an opportunity that I see. See, the way I'm wired is I'm a pioneer, I'm an innovator. When things get to maintenance mode, I get bored. So this whole thing with hemp, and I'm going to say, just like regenerative agriculture wasn't really known much about 5 years ago, starting to become more popular. The same thing is happening with hemp. You're going to start to hear more and more about its multitude of uses. I mean, I'll just tease you with one thing: car batteries made out of hemp.
What?
We can take it down to the graphene level, and it's not commercially available yet. But I am talking to people who want me to grow hemp to make batteries. And I said car batteries. It could also be for like a hearing aids and very small applications. These are things that I'm just learning about, and I hear a new thing like every week or two that people are doing. So it's I'm just giving you a heads up, you listeners
Wow.
here, that you'll hear more and more about hemp as the years tick by. So that is what I'm doing. I mean, just today, I had a visitor here from China, and from Holland, that we were discussing the possibilities of working together. So this is a global opportunity here that I predict in 5 years from now, almost everybody will have a general working knowledge that hemp is more than marijuana, or it's different than marijuana. Because right now, I'm amazed at still how many people, I just had someone recently say, "I thought hemp was only marijuana." No, that's a tiny segment in the possibility of it. And by the way, just to clarify, what I'm growing has almost no THC in it, which is the intoxicating part of marijuana. So and I people say, well, if I what if I go in, and I'm literally, as I look over my screen here, I'm looking at a whole field of hemp here, and you could smoke that whole field and it ain't going to make you high because there's very little THC in it. And by the way, we still have to test it to satisfy the state because they want to make sure, we're not trying to sneak in some marijuana there or something like that. And but talking about some of the challenges, the next farm bill that our national Congress is trying to get passed is we're promoting that we don't have to do all those obligatory things that we shouldn't have to do because it's not marijuana.
Right. Thank you for clarifying the difference.
Yeah.
As you are talking about regenerative agriculture and its ability to, one of the things I was most amazed as you started talking about it originally when we met was its ability to keep the soil intact
Mhm.
rather than having crazy I don't know how would you'd call it, erosion events. My
Yeah.
the reason I bring it up, there's this story in my family about how my family lived in Oklahoma.
Mhm.
Part of them, there was a Cherokee lineage, and originally they'd gone there for the Dawes Rolls, where you had to go register if you were Cherokee, and then you were given a portion of land to farm. But then we over-farmed it,
Yes.
and the Dust Bowl came, and there's a story of them walking out
Mhm.
of Oklahoma and moving from Oklahoma to Colorado with 1 car and all of the family members, and they used to have bigger families back then, but my grandfather and
Mhm.
several of them were on foot, and they walked all the way there, and I think of how short-sighted we often are as a human species. Yes, none of us, by and large, lived through the Dust Bowl. Could there be anyone who's still alive who lived through that? Perhaps, but it's amazing how short-sighted we become that that you've gotta convince people
Mhm.
to do regenerative ag and save our
Yeah.
most precious resource, the land. I mean, what else is more precious? The water, I suppose, but all of the natural resources. It it's kind of remarkable that you've gotta convince people. I mean, what was it, the 30s, the 1930s, 1930? That's not that long ago. It's less than 100 years ago. It's
Well, here's the thing, Cheryl. I don't hold against the generation that was that was stewarding the land in the 30s very much. They just didn't know better because when the plow was invented, the guy who invented the steel plow was a fellow by the name of John Deere. Almost everybody's probably heard that name. That's what
oh
made the
my
equipment
gosh.
company famous because he invented a plow that was an implement that was able to turn the soil over and it made it easier to farm. And then out of that came this huge global company that almost everybody here knows about. His name was John Deere. Go look it up. But what happened was the side effect was that plow, which was so instrumental in progress in the late 1800s and the early 1900s, became the worst thing that could have happened in the 1930s because of the perfect storm, dry weather, a couple years in a row. They had wind. It worked up until then, but that was the moment where it's like, oh, this quote unquote side effect, we have to do something about it. But here's the thing, Cheryl. In 2023, a year and a half ago, there was 8 people killed in Illinois because of dust blowing off a field.
What?
That literally there was a 50 some car pileup. You can Google it and find it in Illinois, May of 2023. It just infuriated me and those of my regenerative friends. Like that did not have to happen. I'll give the people in the 30s a little bit of a pass, but not 2023. No, there is no reason for that to happen. And that's where I have a problem. And there, I'm a low government guy. I don't like to make laws, but sometimes you have to make laws for stupid people. So there, I'm just venting a little bit, but that's not right when we have to deal with that because we know how to fix that. It's common knowledge now. So there, that's a little bit of my context in that.
Wow, what a what a context.
Yeah.
In the 1800s
Mhm.
through the first third of the previous century, we did not know
Yeah.
the ramifications of that, of
And
what was correct or
I asked the
wow.
question because now I know there are things that we are doing, you and I are probably going to feel guilty about in 10 or 20 years. We're innocent in a way.
Right.
And I get that. But still, when we notice things, and I call them the side effects. I mean, I go back to big pharma now. You can't take one medication that doesn't have a side effect. It just that's just like okay, the good just barely outweighs the bad, so we do it. And I'm not against pharma, okay, but we've gone too far in that direction. Plants generally don't have side effects, and I say that generally don't have side effects when we try to use medicinal ways, and we've lost the art of all that. And I feel like we need to make that pendulum swing back a little bit. And I'm all for both, but still, we got to get back to let's just say the middle here, because I believe not to get overly spiritual, but I believe God pretty much gave all our answers. They're right in front of us. The problem is though, Cheryl, is you can't patent a plant. And when you look at business the way it's done, you can patent a pill. And so then all of a sudden, you look at the TV commercials, the highest, commercial percentage is usually the drug companies. Why is that? Well, they have the money because they're doing something that affects us all. And again, it's a little difficult for me as a farmer. I have no advertising budget to actually do all the research that would be necessary to figure out how we could address some of our illnesses with plants. But I bet if we had shift those billions over now to plants, we wouldn't have the chronic issues that we have today because we didn't have this amount of chronic issues 50 years ago, 100 years ago. So somewhere along there, we've kind of like, I guess you'd say, outsmarted ourselves.
Right. Boy, I hope your Penn State College of Medicine studies move quickly. I mean, I
Yep.
heard what you said about the 10-year clock, but
Yep.
wow.
Yep.
It has been a fascinating, eye-opening conversation with you today. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Where can people learn more about you and the work that you do?
Yeah, simply have a website, stevegroff.com. And there you can kind of see what I do, the way I farm and so forth. And yeah, I enjoy what I do. I love what I do. I'm a teacher, I'm an educator. And if you're interested in my book, you can get it off there. Get a little bit more behind the scenes look of what it looks like to be a farmer. Get an inside look, if you will. The book itself is not how to farm, but more or less, perspectives and so forth of where I see the future is going. And that's what's exciting for me because I am hopeful, and I look forward to all the good things we're trying to do here, actually to impact human health and well-being.
Thank you for fighting the good fight. It's so inspiring to have this conversation with you today.
Yeah,
I'll
you're
make
welcome.
sure that your links are in the liner notes of the episode.
Right.
Any final things you'd like to leave the listeners with today?
Well, I would just say that do a little research yourself if any of these ideas piqued your interest. The only way we're going to make a difference, it's going to have to be kind of a grassroots way at this moment in time of history. And so the more that you can, go to your grocer and say, do you have any regenerative agriculture farmers? Just put that question out there. Because I've asked some of the people I sell to, can you, promote as regenerative? And like nobody asked for it. That was a couple years ago. Some of them same ones now are saying, hey, what do you have, in regenerative? So do what you can and learn all you can and then influence wherever you can. I think that's my final challenge to us all here because I think we can make a difference. I think we all agree this is the future and it is the way to go.
Absolutely. Farmer Steve, thanks for your time.
You're welcome, Cheryl. Appreciate the opportunity.
I hope you are as inspired and called forth by my conversation with Farmer Steve as I am. Join me next week on another episode of the Magnify Your Message podcast, where I will be interviewing another groundbreaking, revolutionary thought leader in their field who is using their life's work to make a difference in the lives of the people they serve. I'll see you next time. If you enjoyed this, please like, subscribe, and share this episode with everyone that you feel it would benefit. Thank you in advance. And when you're ready to share your story and your work with the world, I can help. Visit CherylHunter.com to learn how. I am Cheryl Hunter, and until next time, know that your message has the power to change the world.